1. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Real Time Talk. I'm Quentin Anderson, and today we have with us Kyle Bernhardt. He is currently an independent consultant. Company title is CEO, question mark. So on his way to becoming an entrepreneur. Kyle works at the intersection of technology and forward progress in the architecture, engineering, and construction industry. From product management to business strategy to go to market leadership, his career has put him in the room where it happens to drive progress and success for market leading AEC SaaS businesses. And that is just the tip of the iceberg with Kyle. Kyle, how are you doing today?
I am great, Quentin. Looking forward to the conversation.
As am I, and thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to have a couple minutes with us. Let's get right into it and learn a little bit more about your story. So, we know your AEC technology SaaS. Can you tell us a little bit more detail about sort of your story and your background and where you come from?
Yeah, sure, no problem. So I'm a guy whose my education was a mechanical engineer. I came from a family where my dad ran a general contractor, and so I kind of had a lot of kind of construction and engineering in my kind of upbringing. And I got out of education and mechanical engineering and was going to go be a mechanical engineer. And I had a really formative experience where I got an internship at a consulting engineer who'd been sold the MEP flavor of AutoCAD. It was called Building Systems back then. I'm dating myself. And it became my job. And I realized this on day one that I was actually hired because I had said I kind of knew that app and I really didn't, but it was my job to learn it and teach the rest of the firm how to do it. And so that summer kind of taught me all about kind of, I don't know, how cool it is to kind of build the tools themselves more so than use the tools. And that kind of started me in my trajectory. I ended up working at Autodesk for but became 16 years. But, I started as like the guy who answered the support questions when you got escalated up from all the resellers for MEP and someone was stumped. That became my job to solve that. And so I did that. And, I eventually transitioned into product management, which is kind of like the executive role on a software development team. If you're ever pissed about why a piece of software doesn't do what you want to do, like find the product manager and they're the one you're supposed to yell at. Don't yell at the developers. It's never their fault. But I got into product management and did that for like 9 years, working on Revit and, all sorts of different parts as the cloud came out and, worked on some stuff around building performance analysis, as we'll get into visualization, reality capture, and then cloud collaboration. So was deeply involved in BIM 360 stuff. And you're working with Revit models in the cloud, and we used to call C4R, now BIM Collaborate Pro. I'm the guy you can yell at for most things with that. That was my baby. And then after like 9 years in that, I worked in our business strategy team at Autodesk. And that's kind of more higher level view around product strategy, go-to-market strategy, and that stuff. And that was an interesting experience. And after that, I joined a startup called TestFit, worked there as CRO for almost 3 years. And that was a great formative experience. And now you guys find me in a transition period about to start my next thing.
Awesome. Very, very exciting. And going back to BIM 360, what was the strategy when that was first becoming a thing? What was the strategy and idea? How did it relate to the cloud? How did it relate to some of the problems that it was trying to solve? What was BIM 360 supposed to do back in the day?
Oh, it's such a good question. You get to bring me back into some stuff that was fun. Like I said, I was in the room where it happened and a lot of this stuff. I mean, I think, in my experience, BIM 360 wasn't actually a single thing when it started. I mean, it was a bunch of independent acquisitions in the construction space. In many ways, BIM 360 was Autodesk's effort to leverage their market position in design to go get a foothold in construction, a place that they historically hadn't really had much of a foothold.
Hmm.
And so that's literally where the branding came from, was putting BIM in the name, which is Autodesk, brand affinity around BIM. Eventually it became a bit of a noose, which is why you see the construction cloud now, because they tried to kind of pivot away from Autodesk just doing BIM, and you can use construction cloud for anything. But bring back to answering your question, it was all about providing a better way for construction delivery, especially kind of more in the office. especially at its inception. I always think about the construction market as there's like in the office slash trailer and then like out in the job site. And historically, Autodesk's focus was really more in the trailer, in the office, more in like pre-con, more so it was in like site execution, although they did eventually acquire themselves into that part of the market.
And was it more about an opportunity for expansion, or was there a serious problem that needed to be addressed? For example, once transitioning from pre-con to construction, or was there, in your mind, did you see that there was a serious problem that needed to be addressed there?
Oh, of course. Well, I mean, I think both of those things are true, Quentin. I mean, it's not that Autodesk wanted to get into the market and there wasn't an opportunity. There was, and it was an adjacent market, and it was clear that there was going to be significant digitization, especially because of what the cloud allowed to happen. But I mean, you don't have to be too deep into construction to appreciate that there are some things that could be done more efficiently. And there are certain technologically based inefficiencies that technology can help with. And so I think that's kind of there's definitely been a technology first hypothesis around the digitization of construction technology and workflows. I think the last 15 years has kind of proven that that hypothesis wasn't entirely true. There's been, as well, if we want to nerd out on it, I mean, there's plenty of instances where like it wasn't a technology problem, it wasn't a technology solution, even though technology seemed to be the solution. And so there haven't necessarily been the same outcomes. But to answer your question, yeah, there's clearly an opportunity for things to go a lot better. I mean, just look at the trades and how those trades come together and the inefficiency that can happen when you find a collision during actual assembly. Like that's insane. Like that's expensive. It stops crews. It's a little cliche at this point, but back in 2009, 2010, those things were very obvious. And there was a lot of great innovation happening, especially in the startup sphere. And Autodesk kind of acquired a few different pieces and slapped BIM 360 as a brand name on top of that. And, kind of started their foothold. And it's been a kind of an outgrowth from there. As it's gone through a number of different acquisitions and a huge amount of internal investment. And at this point, I mean, I don't know their exact headcount, but there's a lot of money being spent on the construction segment inside the walls of Autodesk, both in terms of ongoing headcount spend and a huge amount of acquisitions. I mean, billions of dollars of acquisitions in the last 15 years.
And in terms of adoption, how does that compare from back in 2010 to today? Were there challenges initially with the construction portion process adopting some of these technologies, and has that changed from today, or was there always sort of coming in with open arms to BIM 360 and some of the other technologies when it came to adopting it for construction?
Well, it's certainly easier now. I mean, I think there's an expectation for pretty much any construction firm that the way in which you execute your projects has to have a certain level of digitization. Mm-hmm. And I think a big driver, I mean, in some cases, there's genuine efficiency and benefit to the project outcomes. And then in other parts, the part that I don't think people talk as much about is like, there's a bit of like peacock fluffing of feathers at the start end of jobs to get them. And being able to talk about how digitized and fancy your process is certainly goes a long way in some circumstances. I mean, in other cases, it's just who's got the lowest bid. But I think there's a much higher expectation that there's digitization, and at the same time, there's enough awareness amongst the owner community that sometimes it's just written in that you got to do BIM. It's written in that you got to have a single common data environment, and that kind of external mandate drives the technology utilization that's much higher than what it's historically been. So all of those factors mean that there's kind of more of a push, if you will, into adoption. And then the other part that I think is absolutely true is there's been a huge amount of consolidation amongst the construction tech side, especially, whereas there's just been all these different point solution startups that have been really good at a specific task, but everyone kind of worked independent of each other. And if you kind of take a step back and look at Procore's build out, Autodesk Construction Cloud build out, there's been a huge amount of consolidation into those as they kind of emerge as more of a horizontal industry cloud layer. And as you become industry cloud, now all of a sudden it's not just doing one specific thing like clash detection. Now it's kind of doing everything. And so in a world where that's an adoption option, it just frankly makes it easier to go adopt those things because now they just work more better together. You could argue maybe they're not as good as they used to be, or they're certainly not moving as fast as they used to be, which tends to happen after you get acquired. But ultimately, there's no question they're much more cohesive in terms of something to adopt and operate inside of.
Yeah, and when we're thinking about, ideas that are sort of cloud and digitization, where do you find the opportunities for value are, and where do you think the values or the opportunities for value are more situational? So, for example, perhaps visualization, when can that come into play as helpful? Or also, like you said, having a central data repository, when is that important, and when, or is it always important, or is it sometimes not important? And then other things like running simulations for class detection, those
Mhm.
kinds of things. So when we're thinking about digitization in the cloud, where do you think the big value adds are, and where do you think maybe more kind of situational?
Well, there's a good question. I mean, I guess it's always nice to get an immersive experience about the current state of the design. It's like that's kind of an always. The question I found is like, is it worth the effort to go deliver that?
Hmm.
Because typically that has a bit of effort required and a bit of work required. And so you've got to have these moments where there's an ROI for you. And in my experience, there's kind of two different moments where that really matters. As you're establishing the core design, that kind of early concept schematic design phase, that's a great moment for immersive visualizations because that's tends to be the moment where you're locking in the massing and kind of the sense of the experience of the design. I mean, you may not have all your products selected yet and all that stuff, but the kind of the soul of the design is being written there. And
Hmm.
once you've kind of written the soul, you can do a bunch more work and there's a lot more money to be spent, but the soul's baked. And so getting visualization in those moments can be incredibly powerful, especially for an owner operator who is used to just looking at 2D drawings and trying to flex their brain because they don't look at plans very often and try to turn that 2D, drawing into a sense of what that experience is going to be. And so that tends to be the big one where I feel like especially photorealistic visualizations are valuable because in my experience, there's kind of two tiers. There's like good enough 3D, run in your browser. I don't care what sort of, hardware you're working on, no ray tracing, no textures, just some sense of 3D space. And then there's like, oh, wow, I'm living this. And those are kind of two tiers. And there's a lot of value for kind of just everyday visualization throughout the whole experience. And there's a lot of kind of precedent for that sort of thing to be delivered in the market. But, when you need something that's going to have Unreal behind it and you're going to build your own app and all that stuff, like you need to get those moments where you can kind of hang your hat on the ROI required to deliver those experiences. So it tends to be that on the front end. And then as you get into pre-con, especially as you're planning across the trades, like that's really where the reality of delivering the building and constructing it starts to come in. And so there's a lot of value in clash detection, that sort of thing. Historically, that's been done just with everyday visualization, i.e., Navisworks or oh God, what's the other one? Oh, whatever, I'm drawing a blank. But that sort of thing. But you can certainly throw it into Unreal or higher end visualization capabilities to get that sense of 3D scale. There's no question about that.
And when we're thinking about pre-construction and the what is important for an engineering firm that's involved in the design and what's going through their mind, what are they? What is most important to them in terms of delivery? What are they trying to protect themselves against? What's really driving a lot of decisions behind an engineering firm as they're working up to achieving the end of the milestone of pre-construction with their design?
Well, I mean, let me literally pull out my little balance board here and stand up on my proverbial soapbox. Um, you know, the the engineering firms, I mean, if we're talking pre-con, they don't usually get super deep in that.
Hmm.
When I'm talking pre-con, they've baked their design drawings, design complete, and then the job's been bought out by a GC, and then they've got subs on board, and it's kind of the subs problem to deliver. So it's basically the design team are just getting a bunch of RFIs. They're getting a bunch of questions from the subs as they try to convert that design intent into construction intent, and there's confusion amongst the design drawings. So they tend to call it CA in the engineering architecture side, construction administration.
Hmm.
So there's some engagement there, but at the end of the day, in my experience at least, their goal is to just make it as cheap as possible. They already made their design fees. They've switched over the primary members of that design team to another job.
Hmm.
They've got a separate set of people that are doing CA, and those people's jobs in CA is just to minimize the effort as best as possible, because unless you're going to get new fees from a change order or something, you're just kind of impacting your margin, your core margin. Now, obviously, they want to deliver good client experience, and it's not like they don't care, but
Right.
in my experience, profit margin drives behavior more than anything else.
Hmm.
And so the engineering side is just all about limiting liability and responsibility, honestly, as best they can at that point, because they already shot their shot with the design. And that was the thing that, was the statement of what needed to be done on the job. When you get into the subs, that's a different story. The subs have a bid that they probably gave to the GC to be part of the original competitive bid, and they bought out the job at a certain thing. And depending on the contract terms, they've got to either honor their original bid, or if they're doing time and materials, try not to go too far above what they had, that sort of thing. And so the subs are just trying to get that job done in a way that the execution is, I guess, is deviating as minimally as possible than what they thought the job was going to be
Right.
when they signed up for it in the first place.
Right. And now, if we kind of incorporate digitization and cloud and visualization, and if we look at kind of both the subs and the engineers, if we start with the
Mm-hmm.
subs, where do you think, or do you see any value adds that the subs necessarily have for having a digitized pipeline, or being in the cloud, or using visualizations? Is that solving any of the main, is that helping the subs achieve, like you said, achieving the design as minimally as possible?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of depth to this question, Quentin. So, I mean, you gave a couple of things in there, and there's a different answer for the different things. I wouldn't conflate like visualization and the cloud, for example. Those things are independent in my view.
Right.
I mean, there's no question that the cloud as a data layer provides connectivity amongst the teams and more certainty about what's the latest information. I mean, just the I mean, Audit spent $1 billion on a thing called PlanGrid that was the best there was at pointing at like what's the latest drawings on an iPad, or I guess $700 million, whatever it was. And so clearly there's a lot of value in just knowing what's the latest, set of the drawings.
Mhm.
And there's no question the cloud can deliver that. And it also can allow connectivity from company to company. If you think about it, it's like, deliver a building is a team sport. It's not about the individuals, it's about the teams, and those teams are different companies. Those different companies have different business interests, they have different legal liabilities, and they've got, for better or worse, reasons to not always bear hug each other. And so historically, without the cloud, you kind of had a natural barrier between those different stakeholders just
Got it.
because you had to upload to the FTP site or whatever.
Right. Right.
But with the cloud now, all of a sudden, technology is allowing connectivity that goes beyond what I think the industry is in a steady state looking to actually have. And so, that's a good thing. It pushes firms to work more closely together. And so you kind of get connectivity and collaboration in the cloud in a way that others don't necessarily get. And you also get access because now the web browser is a delivery layer for an experience. And much the same way with like streaming, if I get some cool visualization streaming app and I just got to double click on an executable and it spins up and it loads up, and now I'm looking at my stream pixels, and I could run it on my crappy Surface Pro sitting in front of me, and I don't need an RTX 4000 to go push a bunch of pixels. Like, now all of a sudden that technology has opened up an experience to people with expertise without necessarily the technology chops. And that can be very, very powerful as well, which is, I think, a common thread for anybody who's in the sub side, is being able to deliver that experience in a way that allows the expertise to come to the problem, in a way that there's been historically a lot of like deeply experienced professionals who stand over the shoulder of the hotshot technology guy or girl, and that is the means by which the expertise is brought to the problem. and the cloud and the web as a layer, and even streaming technology allows you to kind of bring the problem to the expertise in a with lower barriers, I guess, if that's a way to think about it.
And if we start thinking about the browser and incorporating visualizations into a browser, for the subs, who are they sharing those with? Is it with the GC or is it with an outside consultant who's an expert? Is it with the original design firm? Who would you say they tend to share those with? Internally, maybe.
Oh, I mean, it can be internally, but I mean, the classic example is just from trade to trade. There's this big uh, moment of collaboration as the GC kind of quarterbacks between the different trades as they try to sequence the execution, and each trade wants to make sure, hey, my crew's showing up next week. It's way cheaper for me to solve this problem now virtually before the crew finds it in the site next week. And so let me make sure that I'm kind of, it's almost like, that coordination process is kind of the icebreaker. If you're going to use an ocean analogy, and it's sitting there breaking the ice, and sitting there behind the icebreaker is a bunch of crews that are going to go into that building and go assemble and construct it. And so, usually it's sub to sub. There's not a lot of owners that are like, give me my, behind the wall piping immersive visualization. So there's not as much of like an owner need in my experience there. But certainly cross trade is the primary. And, if the GC is self executing, they'll get involved even more just because they have a stake in that game.
And when we're talking about different types of visualizations inside a browser, what are some of the ones that you've experienced? Have you seen people stream? Have you seen people render it locally on their browser for visualizations? What are some of the ways that you've seen people use a browser in the AEC industry to kind of visualize projects?
I've seen the whole spectrum. I mean, the classic example is just using the web as a viewer. I remember like ActiveX controls. I mean, there was a whole thing at Autodesk where we realized we had like 14 different viewers, and we needed like one viewer to rule them all.
Yeah.
And this really, really smart guy, like literally rewrote the Navisworks engine in JavaScript over a weekend. And that underlying technology became what is known as the LMV, large model viewer. And then there's one viewer to rule them all, and it's natively rendering. But then I've also seen using the browser as basically a wrapper for graphics stream client, server side onto the client, and using that. And then, I've seen that as, there's been a bunch of backends that are driving those graphics, inclusive of like Unreal. So I've seen kind of a full spectrum there.
And one of the things that comes to mind that I'm curious about is, has Autodesk explored the idea of streaming into a browser, or have they typically stayed away from that?
I mean, we certainly talked about it. I mean, it's a way to do it. I don't recall whether Autodesk actually put something out there, so I don't want to talk about like internal stuff that was never publicized, but it's certainly a method that, Autodesk was well aware of. And I think I mean, there certainly was like app streaming. I mean, there was a time when like that's how you trialed Revit. You technically were streaming the graphics of the Revit app, on a trial, so you didn't have to install like 8 GB of data, and some app instance up in a server was there. So I know Autodesk has touched streaming as a general thing, but Autodesk made an acquisition of the Wild a few years back. I mean, it's been an interesting relationship between Autodesk and visualization because it's a clear adjacent market to its core value of making drawings and capturing detailed design. I mean, that's the moneymaker in the AEC segment at Autodesk. But I don't know that it's ever really been a big revenue driver,
Hmm.
as much as it's been a cool technology that's been sitting adjacent, with a lot of competition, and a less clear pathway to where there's at least a product level differentiation. I mean, Autodesk always has the ability to bundle it in their core things like the AEC collection, so they have differentiation that only they can deliver, which is you're already paying for it. You put it in there, you should use it. You don't have to pay for something else. I mean, that's the primary differentiation of a lot of things, given how they choose to sell their apps.
Hmm. And do you see any scenarios where, streaming an application is, perhaps a way to go over other ways of visualization? Or do you see it as, the large model viewer that Autodesk can pretty much handle, 99% of the use cases, or do you think it has its place? And what are kind of the benefits and setbacks of, streaming an app?
Well, I mean, the big thing is you don't need hardware that's fancy. You just need a good internet connection.
Right.
And so there's a lot of computing environments where you have that, and the person on the other end of that device has expertise or influence on a job, and that's the best way to deliver it. So, I mean, streaming is nice because you don't need a discrete GPU, you just need a good internet connection. And there's a lot more people that have that than people with good GPU and the technical chops to go spin up download some executable and install some environment and connect to the right visualization experience. There's just frankly friction involved, and there's plenty of people in digital technology that can overcome that friction. But there's, I guess, the people that tend to have the biggest influence on jobs and decision making tend to be the people with the least appetite for jumping through hoops to get into an experience. And so the browser kind of tends to be, the Teflon experience, because just click this link, bud. Go on, I send you an email, click the link, just go do your thing from there. And so it tends to be one of the lowest friction experiences on the consuming side, with, of course, the reality that you got to prepare that visualization experience in the first place, which is that's the I and the ROI, the investment side.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and as a shameless plug, that's what Eagle 3D is trying to do, or that's what we do. We upload Unreal Engine app, and you can stream it over the browser just by clicking the URL. We have, I know we're kind of coming up on our time. We got a couple questions from the audience, if you don't mind.
Yep.
Okay, throughout your professional career, have you seen any application of asset streaming instead of moving assets manually between apps? Between multiple 3D modeling or visualization apps?
Yeah, I've definitely seen it. And I think there's a lot. I mean, I guess let me just reflect. When I see asset streaming, I think of the idea that you've got an API-based connection between one platform and the other. You have some degree of translation happening in an automated way that's transparent to the user. So it just seems like two apps are connected. Because when I see the alternative and their question is moving assets manually between apps, I think of import export. So hopefully, Muzadid, that's really what you're asking about. So yes, I've seen it, and there's a lot more of that going on right now. You can look at something like Speckle, the Autodesk AEC data model API. There's a lot of technological implementations that allow apps to be more connected. And so have I seen it? Yes. Is there going to be more of it in the future? Absolutely. And it'll be built on API connections between those apps. The future is not, let me open that model, wait 5 minutes for Revit to load it, go into a tab to hit export, put a file on disk, upload it to another system. That's not the future. The future is a much more connected experience.
Roger that. And it looks like you're reading these questions alongside with me.
Sorry, I got it over here on this screen.
Nice. Yeah. The next one may be more of a comment to us. Seeing your prices are much higher than other streaming services. Well, just have to say, in a lot of cases, that's not the case. And we have, obviously the highest quality platform on the market. The next one, the thing with pixel streaming is easier for people. We deal with construction and they prefer the browser. Can you kind of speak to that last one, maybe?
That's what we just talked about, Quentin. I mean, it's like, look, literally the lowest friction way to get any technology experience is a link in an email. I mean, that's just the truth. Like, it's there, everyone's already on email. There's a little button you click, your browser opens up, and as long as it's native, which, is pretty easy to do and not require a big install as like a browser plugin, you're in that experience. And so it is the best way to do it. And figuring out the best pipeline to deliver that tends to be the game of actually implementing that type of an experience. And certainly there's plenty of providers out there that can do that sort of thing. And if you're looking to deliver a good client experience, a good experience for stakeholders, there's kind of nothing better than the link in an email.
Yeah. Just keep it simple. Kyle, we're already running up to our time. We haven't touched on your startup at all. Is there anything you'd like to share? Are you still in stealth mode?
It's going to be, well, it's about to really get started under stealth. So not really. Okay. It's been a whole career of mine and my now co-founder working on apps that do BIM as it's been known. And there's been some pretty fundamental inefficiencies in how that's been done. And we're really excited to take our shot at how it could be done better. And crucially, better in a way that's not just technology, because there's clearly better technology ways to do what's always been done, but better in a way that you can draw that line to an outcome that the owner cares about, that the principal cares about. I mean, I've always, the thing that's been so obvious to me is I've seen great technology be rolled out over the years and not necessarily reach the heights that we all expected it is. If you want to move behavior at a macro level, you got to build something that you can draw a line between that spend and the partners at your design firm, like making their vacation home payments, the developers that are funding that whole job, getting the returns for their limited partners so that they, as developers, GPs, can go make their profits. Like those are the things that matter. And the technologies that allow that are the ones that matter and change things. And that's what I'm trying to do.
Well, I mean, you definitely have the background. It sounds like you know exactly what you're doing in the industry. So I'm very
I
excited
do.
to see what you guys come up with. Kyle, thank you so much for swinging by. I know you're super busy. And thank you, everyone, for watching today's show. This has been Real Time Talk with Eagle 3D Streaming. I'm Quentin Anderson, and see you all in the next show. All right. Thanks, Kyle. Okay. And we